Last night was a night of accentuating the positives. First up, Alcoa's earnings in the US came out a little bit stronger than expectations, so that helped set the tone for equity markets. And a positive development in Greece. The Greek government auctioned off about 1.6 billion euros worth of 6-month treasury debt, and it was actually quite well received. So the yield that it sold at was actually less than what it would cost for the Greek government to borrow directly from the EU. So that is a good sign of confidence, particularly from the banking sector in Greece, which actually bought about 80% of it. So let's fingers crossed that those sorts of events continue. Perhaps not such a good event, but certainly positive for the pound was the fact that inflation figures in the UK have been quite stubborn, so inflation's holding above 3%. So overnight what we saw was the US dollar a bit weaker, but particularly the euro and the pound up about 1.5 cents. So the New Zealand dollar's trading closer to 72 cents and 71 cents this morning. They're tracking fairly sideways against the euro and the pound. One longer term influence for the New Zealand dollar is going to be what some of those major central banks in the Northern Hemisphere do. Now with Europe looking like it's going to be growing quite slowly and a lot of fiscal restraint going on, increasingly monetary policy is likely to be on hold for longer in order to help provide some support to the economy. In the US, inflation's actually still very, very weak, and areas like the housing market's still pretty soft, so it looks like there's plenty of scope there also for interest rates to remain quite low. In the UK, as we're seeing, it's slightly different there. Whilst the economy is quite soggy, there is a lot of fiscal restraint going on there as well, but inflation has actually been quite persistent. So there's the prospect of the Bank of England raising rates a little bit sooner than those other two major central banks. But we do think it's very likely that we won't see those central banks moving until next year. If that's the case, it does mean that there's likely to be that continued firmness in the New Zealand dollar against those currencies until we start seeing their interest rates also starting to move up. So that may well underpin the New Zealand dollar for much of this year. Now, the USDA has raised its global dairy production forecasts for the 2010-2011 season. The reasons are primarily domestic to the US. The high dairy prices in the US market has meant that fewer farmers than expected have taken advantage of the herd reduction schemes that they've had over there. Consequently, US domestic supply is likely to be a bit larger than expected. The USDA's outlook for protein prices is for them to be relatively stable, but for fat-based dairy products such as butter, they're expecting some slight price increases to come through.